Thomas Alive to Die presents
San Ysidro McDonald's Massacre. On July 15, 1984, James Huberty commented to his wife Etna that he suspected he had a mental health problem. 2 days later, on the morning of July 17, he called a San Diego mental health clinic requesting an appointment. Leaving his contact details with the receptionist, Huberty was assured the clinic would return his call within hours. According to his wife, he sat quietly beside the telephone for several hours awaiting the return call before abruptly walking out of the family home and riding to an unknown destination on his motorcycle. Unbeknownst to Huberty, the receptionist had misspelled his name as Schauberty. His polite demeanor conveyed no sense of urgency to the operator, and he had elaborated in the phone call that he had never been hospitalized for mental health issues, therefore the call had been logged as a non-crisis inquiry to be handled within 48 hours. Approximately 1 hour later, Huberty returned home in a contented mood. After eating dinner, Huberty, his wife, and their 2 daughters aged 12 and 10 cycled to a nearby park. Later that evening, he and Etna watched a film together on their television. The following morning, Wednesday, July 18, 1984, Huberty, his wife, and children visited the San Diego Zoo. In the course of their walk through the zoo, Huberty told his wife of his belief that his life was effectively over. Referring to the mental health clinic's failure to return his phone call the previous day, he said, "Well, society had their chance." After eating lunch at a McDonald's restaurant in the Claremont neighborhood of San Diego, the Huberty family returned home. Shortly thereafter, Huberty walked into his bedroom wearing a maroon t-shirt and green camouflage slacks as his wife lay relaxing upon their bed. He leaned toward Etna and said, "I want to kiss you goodbye." Etna kissed her husband, then asked him where he was going, stating her intention to soon prepare the family dinner. Huberty calmly replied he was going hunting for humans. Holding a gun across his shoulder and carrying a box of ammunition in a bundle wrapped in a checkered blanket, Huberty glanced toward his elder daughter Zelia as he walked toward the front door of the family home and said goodbye. "I won't be back." Huberty then drove down San Ysidro Boulevard. According to eyewitnesses, he drove first toward a Big Bear supermarket and then toward a U.S. Post Office branch before entering the parking lot of a McDonald's restaurant approximately 200 yards from his Averill Road apartment. At approximately 3:56 p.m. on July 18, Huberty drove his black Mercury Marquis sedan into the parking lot of the McDonald's restaurant on San Ysidro Boulevard. In his possession were a Browning HP semi-automatic pistol, a Uzi carbine, a Winchester 1212 gauge pump-action shotgun, a box, and a cloth bag filled with hundreds of rounds of ammunition for each weapon. A total of 45 customers were present inside the restaurant. Entering the restaurant minutes later, Huberty first aimed his shotgun at a 16-year-old employee named John Arnold from a distance of approximately 15 feet. As he did so, the assistant manager Guillermo Flores shouted, "Hey John, that guy's going to shoot you." According to Arnold, when Huberty pulled the trigger, nothing happened. As Huberty inspected his gun, the manager of the restaurant, 22-year-old Neva Kane, walked toward the service counter of the restaurant in the direction of Arnold, as Arnold, believing the incident to be a distasteful joke, began to walk away from the gunman. Huberty fired his shotgun toward the ceiling before aiming the Uzi at Kane, shooting her once beneath her left eye. Kane died minutes later. Immediately after shooting Kane, Huberty fired his shotgun at Arnold, wounding the teenager in the chest and arm before shouting a comment to the effect of, "Everybody on the ground." Huberty then referred to all present in the restaurant as "dirty swine Vietnam assholes," before claiming that he had killed 1,000, and that he intended to kill 1,000 more. Although Huberty had repeatedly shouted throughout his shooting spree that he had been a veteran of the Vietnam War, he had never actually served in any military branch. Upon hearing Huberty's profane rant and seeing Kane and Arnold shot one customer, 25-year-old Victor Rivera tried to persuade Huberty not to shoot anyone else. In response, Huberty shot Rivera 14 times, repeatedly shouting "shut up" as Rivera screamed in pain. As staff and customers tried to hide beneath tables and service booths, Huberty turned his attention toward 6 women and children huddled together. He first killed 19-year-old Maria Colmenero Silva with a single gunshot to the chest, then fatally shot 9-year-old Claudia Perez in the stomach, cheek, thigh, hip, leg, chest, back, armpit and head with his Uzi. He then wounded Perez's 15-year-old sister Imelda once in the hand with the same weapon and fired upon 11-year-old Aurora Pina with his shotgun. Pina, initially wounded in the leg, had been shielded by her pregnant aunt, 18-year-old Jackie Reyes. Huberty shot Reyes 48 times with the Uzi. Beside his mother's body, 8-month-old Carlos Reyes sat up and wailed, whereupon Huberty shouted at the child, then killed the toddler with a single pistol shot to the center of the back. Huberty then shot and killed a 62-year-old trucker named Lawrence Verslois before targeting a family seated near the play area of the restaurant who had tried to shield their son and his friend beneath the tables with their bodies. 31-year-old Blythe Reagan Herrera had shielded her 11-year-old son Matao beneath one booth as her husband Ronald protected Matao's friend 12-year-old Keith Thomas beneath a booth directly across from them. Ronald Herrera urged Thomas not to move, shielding the boy with his body. Thomas was shot in the shoulder, arm, wrist and left elbow but was not seriously wounded. Ronald Herrera was shot 6 times in the stomach, chest, arm, hip, shoulder and head but survived. His wife Blythe and son Matao were both killed by numerous gunshots to the head. Nearby 3 women had also attempted to hide beneath a booth. 24-year-old Guadalupe Del Rio lay against a wall. She was shielded by her friends 25-year-old Gloria Ramirez and 31-year-old Arisdelce Vuelvas Vargas. Del Rio was hit several times but was not seriously wounded. Ramirez was unhurt, whereas Vargas received a single gunshot wound to the back of the head. She died of her wound the next day, the only person fatally wounded who lived long enough to reach a hospital. At another booth, Huberty killed 45-year-old banker Hugo Vasquez with a single shot to the chest. The first of many calls to emergency services was made shortly after 4 p.m. notifying police of the shooting of a child who had been taken to a post office on San Ysidro Boulevard. The dispatcher mistakenly directed responding officers to another McDonald's 2 miles from the San Ysidro Boulevard restaurant. This error delayed the imposition of a lockdown by several minutes, and the only warnings to civilians walking, riding or driving toward the restaurant were given by passers-by. Shortly after 4 p.m. a young woman named Lydia Flores drove into the parking lot. Stopping at the food pickup window, Flores noticed shattered windows and the sound of gunfire before looking up, and there he was just shooting. Flores reversed her car until she crashed into a fence. She hid in some bushes with her 2-year-old daughter until the shooting ended. At approximately 4:05 p.m. a Mexican couple, Astolfo and Maricela Felix, drove toward one of the service areas of the restaurant. Noting the shattered laminated glass, Astolfo initially assumed renovation work was in progress and that Huberty striding toward the car was a repairman. Huberty fired his shotgun and Uzi at the couple and their 4-month-old daughter Carlota, striking Maricela in the face, arms and chest, blinding her in one eye and permanently rendering one hand unusable. Her baby was critically wounded in the neck, chest and abdomen. Astolfo was wounded in the chest and head. As Astolfo and Maricela staggered away from Huberty's line of fire, Maricela gave their baby to her husband. Astolfo handed the shrieking child to a young woman named Lucia Velasco as his wife collapsed against a car. Velasco rushed the baby to a nearby hospital as her husband assisted Astolfo and Maricela into a nearby building. All 3 members of the Felix family survived. 3 11-year-old boys then rode their bikes into the west parking lot to purchase sundaes. Hearing a member of the public yell something unintelligible from across the street, all 3 hesitated before Huberty shot the 3 boys with his shotgun and Uzi. Joshua Coleman fell to the ground critically wounded in the back, arm and leg. He later recalled looking toward his 2 friends Omer Alonzo Hernandez and David Flores Delgado, noting that Hernandez was on the ground with multiple gunshot wounds to his back and had started vomiting. Delgado had received several gunshot wounds to his head. Coleman survived. Hernandez and Delgado both died at the scene. Huberty next noticed an elderly couple, 74-year-old Miguel Victoria Ulloa and 69-year-old Aida Velasquez Victoria, walking toward the entrance. As Miguel reached to open the door for his wife, Huberty fired his shotgun, killing Aida with a gunshot to the face and wounding Miguel. An uninjured survivor, Oscar Mondragon, later reported observing Miguel cradling his wife in his arms and wiping blood from her face, shouting curses at Huberty, who then approached the doorway, swore at Miguel, then killed him with a shot to the head. Approximately 10 minutes after the first call had been placed to emergency services, police arrived at the correct McDonald's restaurant. The first officer on the scene, Miguel Rosario, rapidly determined the location and cause of the actual disturbance and relayed this information to the San Diego Police Department as Huberty fired at Rosario's patrol car. Officers deployed immediately imposed a lockdown on an area spanning 6 blocks from the site of the shootings. The police established a command post 2 blocks from the restaurant and deployed 175 officers in numerous strategic locations. These officers were joined within the hour by several SWAT team members who also took positions around the restaurant. As Huberty was firing rapidly and alternating between firearms, police initially were unaware how many individuals were inside the restaurant. Furthermore, because most of the restaurant's windows had been shattered by gunfire, reflections from shards of glass provided an additional difficulty for police focusing inside the restaurant. Initially, police were concerned the gunman or gunmen might be holding hostages, although one individual who had escaped from the restaurant informed police there was a single gunman present in the premises holding no hostages and shooting any individual he encountered. At 5:05 p.m. all responding law enforcement personnel were authorized to kill the perpetrator, should they obtain a clear shot. Several survivors later reported observing Huberty walk toward the service counter and adjust a portable radio, possibly to search for news reports of his shooting spree, before selecting a music station and further shooting individuals as he danced to the music. Shortly thereafter, Huberty searched the kitchen area, discovering 6 employees and shouting, "Oh, there's more. You're trying to hide from me." In response, one of the female employees screamed in Spanish, "Don't kill me! Don't kill me!" Before Huberty opened fire, killing 21-year-old Paulina Lopez, 19-year-old Elsa Borboa Fierro, and 18-year-old Margarita Padilla, and critically wounding 17-year-old Albert Leos. Immediately before Huberty had begun shooting, Padilla grabbed the hand of her friend and colleague 17-year-old Wendy Flanagan before the two began to run. Padilla was then fatally shot. Flanagan, 4 other employees, and a female customer hid inside a basement utility room. They were later joined by Leos, who had crawled to the utility room after being shot 5 times. When a fire truck drove within range, Huberty opened fire and repeatedly pierced the vehicle with bullets, slightly wounding 1 occupant. Hearing a wounded teenager, 19-year-old Jose Perez, moaning, Huberty shot him in the head. The boy slumped dead in the booth. Perez died alongside his friend and neighbor, 22-year-old Gloria Gonzalez, and a young woman named Michelle Carn Cross. At one point, Aurora Pina, who had lain wounded beside her dead aunt, baby cousin, and 2 friends, noted a lull in the firing. Opening her eyes, she saw Huberty nearby staring in her direction. He swore and threw a bag of French fries at Pina, then retrieved his shotgun and shot the child in the arm, neck, and jaw. Aurora Pina survived, although she would remain hospitalized longer than any other survivor. At 5:17 p.m. Huberty walked from the service counter toward the doorway close to the drive-in window of the restaurant, affording a 27-year-old police SWAT sniper named Charles Foster deployed to a strategic position on the roof of a post office directly opposite the restaurant, an unobstructed view of his body from the neck down through his telescopic sight. Foster fired a single round from a range of approximately 35 yards. The bullet entered Huberty's chest, severed his aorta just beneath his heart, and exited through his spine, leaving an exit wound 1 inch square and sending Huberty sprawling backwards onto the floor directly in front of the service counter, killing him almost instantly. Immediately after shooting Huberty, Foster relayed to other responding officers he had killed the perpetrator and that his focus remained on the motionless suspect. Nonetheless, as so many rounds had been expended from different firearms within the restaurant, police were not completely certain the sole perpetrator was deceased. Entering the restaurant approximately 1 minute later, a police sergeant focused his gun upon Huberty as he noted the movements of a wounded girl. When asked if the deceased male was the suspect, the girl nodded her head. The entire incident had lasted for 77 minutes, during which time Huberty fired a minimum of 257 rounds of ammunition, killing 20 people and wounding as many others, one of whom was pronounced brain dead upon arrival at hospital and died the following day. 17 of the victims were killed inside the restaurant and 4 in the immediate vicinity. Only 10 individuals inside the restaurant were uninjured, 6 of whom had hidden inside the basement utility room. Several victims had tried to stanch their own wounds and slash or the wounds of their companions with napkins, often in vain. Of the fatalities, 13 died from gunshot wounds to the head, 7 from gunshots to the chest, and one victim, 8-month-old Carlos Reyes, from a single 9mm gunshot to the back. The victims, whose ages ranged from 4 months to 74 years, were predominantly, though not exclusively, of Mexican or Mexican-American ancestry, reflecting local demographics. Initial reports issued by the San Diego Police Department following the massacre indicated that everyone injured or killed within the restaurant had been shot by Huberty in the initial minutes after he had first entered the restaurant. This claim was hotly disputed by survivors, who stated Huberty had shot both wounded and unwounded people over 40 minutes after he had first opened fire. The day after the San Ysidro McDonald's massacre, reporters visited James Huberty's father in Mount Eden, Ohio, to garner further information about his son. Having discussed his son's childhood and the family's religious background, Earl Huberty pointed to a painting of a lost sheep by the Jordan River before beginning to weep, informing reporters, "Yesterday was the worst day of my life. I feel so sorry for those people." McDonald's temporarily suspended all television and radio advertisements in the days following the massacre. In an act of solidarity, arch-rival fast food chain Burger King also temporarily suspended all forms of advertising. Huberty's body was cremated on July 23, 1984. No official religious service was observed throughout this act. His ashes were returned to his widow and later interred in his home state of Ohio. In the weeks following the massacre, Huberty's wife and daughters received numerous death threats, forcing them to temporarily reside with a family friend. All three would attend counseling sessions for over 9 months. Edna Huberty and her daughters initially relocated from San Ysidro to Chula Vista, where Zelia and Cassandra enrolled in school under assumed names. 1 year later, the family moved to the community of Spring Valley. Because of the sheer number of victims, local funeral homes had to use the San Ysidro Civic Center to hold wakes for each victim. The local parish Mount Carmel Church were forced to back-to-back funeral masses in order that each of the dead could be buried in a timely manner. Several police officers who responded to the scene of the San Ysidro McDonald's massacre suffered symptoms including sleep withdrawal, loss of memory, and guilt in the months following the incident. A study commissioned by the National Institute of Mental Health and conducted by the chief psychologist of the San Diego Police Department in 1985 concluded several officers suffered post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of the incident. The San Ysidro McDonald's massacre prompted the city of San Diego to assess the tactical methods by which they responded to incidents of this nature and the firearms in the possession of responding officers. The police department increased training for special units and purchased more powerful firearms in order to better equip law enforcement to respond to scenarios of this magnitude. According to one officer who confessed to having felt inadequate because he had been equipped with a .38 caliber revolver on the day of the massacre, the time had come where you had to have a full-time, committed and dedicated, highly trained, well-equipped team, able to respond rapidly anywhere in the city. On August 2, San Diego Police Chief William Colender held a press conference to disclose the results of the San Diego Police Department's inquiry into their response to the massacre and the fact an estimated 73 minutes had elapsed between the time the first police officer had arrived at the restaurant and Huberty's death. The results of this internal inquiry found that although the arrival of SWAT team members was delayed by rush hour traffic, the police acted appropriately in their method of response. Colender stated any suggestion police should have stormed the restaurant was ludicrous, adding that officers had been unable to obtain a clear view of the gunman because windows had been spider-webbed by bullet holes, making visibility in direct sunlight difficult. He also emphasized the 8-minute delay between the passing of the instruction authorizing all law enforcement personnel to kill Huberty and his death made no difference to the final death toll. Colender finished his report by stating, "I believe the operation was handled the way it should have been handled." When questioned in regards to the actual motive behind Huberty's murder spree, Colender dismissed any notion of a racial motive behind the massacre, informing reporters, "He didn't like anybody. Within 2 days of the San Ysidro McDonald's massacre, the restaurant had been refurbished and renovated. The restaurant planned to again open for business in the hope that, as one employee commented, the building would become just another McDonald's. Following discussions between community leaders and executives, a decision was reached on July 24 that the restaurant would not reopen. The renovated restaurant was demolished at midnight on September 26. Following the closure and demolition of the restaurant, McDonald's donated the ground to the city with the stipulation that no restaurant be constructed upon the site. For over 4 years, alternate plans to convert the site into either a memorial park or a shrine to the dead were considered. The land was sold in February 1988 to Southwestern College for $136,000 with the agreement that a 300-square-foot area in front of the campus extension the college intended to construct be set aside as a permanent memorial to the 21 victims. McDonald's later constructed another restaurant 2 blocks from the site of the massacre upon West San Ysidro Boulevard. The restaurant chain also announced a commitment to donate $1 million to a survivors fund, with the widow of McDonald's founder Ray Kroc also adding a personal contribution of $100,000 to assist with burial costs, financial aid for relatives of the deceased, and counseling for survivors. The sum total of donations received by this fund would exceed $1.4 million. Amidst impromptu protests from some San Ysidro residents and donors, Edna Huberty received the first payout from this fund. A permanent memorial to those killed in the San Ysidro McDonald's massacre was formally unveiled in 1990. This memorial consists of 21 hexagonal white marble pillars 1 to 6 feet each, bearing the name of a victim. The sculpture was designed by a former Southwestern College student named Roberto Valdez, who said of his inspiration for the design, "The 21 hexagons represent each person that died, and they are different heights representing the variety of ages and races of the people involved in the massacre. They are bonded together in the hopes that the community in a tragedy like this will stick together like they did." The monument is located at 460 West San Ysidro Boulevard. Each anniversary of the San Ysidro McDonald's massacre sees this monument decorated with flowers. On the 3 days people of Mexican heritage observe the Day of the Dead, candles and offerings are brought on behalf of the victims. Edna Huberty died of breast cancer in 2003.
News 8's Carlos Amezcua was among the first reporters on the scene. He's been providing live reports for the past 5.5 hours. We go to him now for his report on what happened. Carlos?
Marty, as we arrived shortly after the incident began, the scene was one of absolute confusion. Shots were ringing out. The nightmare was unfolding.
Make sure you approach from the south, and the CP is at 300 West. The shooting suspect is inside the McDonald's. He is contained, moving around in there. Still shots being fired.
He entered the facility heavily armed, immediately started shooting everybody. And the customers that were inside the restaurant had absolutely no chance to escape.
Oh, God.
These images are more of war than of a small fast food restaurant in San Ysidro. Yet it was a local man dressed in battle fatigues who declared, "I have killed 1,000, I'm gonna kill 1,000 more." 41-year-old James Huberty reportedly walked into the restaurant carrying a semi-automatic rifle and 2 other weapons, enough ammunition to last 2 hours. Witnesses inside said he fired wildly into the unsuspecting crowd gathered for a quick evening meal. He fired through windows, hitting people in the street. He fired at men men, women, children, and babies. One officer said it looked like a mass execution. Police, hearing the calls coming across the radio, were confused, not sure how to approach such a dangerous situation. It was all happening so fast. The SWAT team was called in to try and surround the building. Meanwhile, people who escaped, their bodies soaked with blood, were being taken care of by frantic emergency medical crews. The death toll started at 6, then 10, 20, and climbing. By 4:15, a virtual army of police and rescue personnel had crowded the main street through this border town. Suddenly, a shot was fired. Police radio screamed, "He's down, he's down, the suspect's down." James Huberty had fallen to a SWAT sharpshooter's bullet. One single bullet killed the man who had apparently systematically fired, loaded, and reloaded his weapon to kill all those people. It all happened in about an hour. No one can explain why anyone would take so many innocent lives. James Huberty didn't kill his 1,000. He killed enough to shake a whole country and make this small town wonder if its streets will ever be the same.
If you have any fond memories, please indicate it at the comments below. Thanks for watching, subscribe, and like.